This channel is going to be pulling from a lot of different fields of thought, but mysticism is probably the least familiar to most people. In the interest of not accidentally rambling off into unfamiliar territory, I thought it would be worthwhile to start the channel off with a video outlining one of the core concepts of the mystic worldview: the absolute. The absolute is understood in relation to the relative. They are two sides of the same coin. The relative is what we experience as our everyday life. I am me, and you are you. That is a chair, and this is a table. Our minds have evolved to understand the relative quite well. Through sight and touch, we understand things by how they are different from each other. To paint a very broad brush of the absolute, just so we have a starting point, let's imagine a universe without discernible differences. From end to end, there is just one thing. At its most simplified, we could imagine it as a huge yellow square, completely monotone all the way through. But we can go deeper than that. A human being is a unity, and it's allowed to have different features on the top than it does on the bottom. So let's imagine the world exactly as it is right now. Speaking in a relative way, the chair ends when it hits the air, and the air ends when it hits the table. But if we think of the universe as all one enormous ocean of atoms and quantum particles, then we can also perceive the chair and table as having no core difference to their underlying makeup, even if their external appearance has different features. Which is to say, the chair and table are not two things, but one thing. Both of these things can be true at the same time. We can both recognize that there is a chair and it is different from the table because I can take one and smash it to pieces without affecting the other, while also acknowledging that at a quantum level, the chair and table are essentially the same thing. Let's put it another way. If you were able to zoom in on both the chair and table far enough, eventually you would reach a point where you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. The same goes for, say, a boulder and the sun. It works the other direction as well. If we were able to zoom out far enough, well beyond our normal level of perception, we would realize that the chair and table are one thing despite looking like two things. To make this more relatable, let's return to the unity of a human being. The hair of a human being is quite different from the toes. They don't occupy the same space, they have different colors and textures, and all the rest. Yet we have the mental capacity to understand that while, yes, a strand of hair and a toe are different, when you zoom out, they constitute the makeup of a single person. Two things become one thing. For thousands of years, mystics have been saying that the absolute is ineffable, meaning it can't be described. So how the hell did I just describe it in such a short time? Well, I didn't. This was just my useful way of teeing up the relationship of the relative to the absolute in a way that scientific materialists can hopefully understand, which is what most people are today. Spiritual practitioners spend decades of their life pondering the mystery of the absolute, with varying degrees of success. I'm not going to be able to answer every question you might have, but hopefully we can formulate a rough sketch of the concept because it opens up a lot of interesting avenues of thought to explore. I don't want this to become a religious history lesson, but I also don't want to come across like I'm making this up, so I'm going to do a very brief crash course of where this idea comes from. The dichotomy of absolute and relative reality would be best attributed to the Vedas. The most well-known Vedic text is the Upanishads. Vedic religion formed the philosophical foundation on which Hinduism and Buddhism would grow, proving to be one of the most fruitful spiritual worldviews to ever exist. In Hinduism, absolute and relative reality are best understood through the concept of Brahman and Atman. Brahman is ultimate reality, the invisible creative force whose presence is implicated by the very existence of the universe. Atman is the individual self, or the soul. One of the most profound teachings of Hinduism is the idea that Brahman and Atman are one and the same, that the creator and the created are not separate. There is a verse in the Upanishads which brushes on the topic. In it, a Vedic teacher tells his student to bring him some fig tree seeds. "Open it," says the teacher. "What do you see there?" "Some very small seeds, sir." "Open one of those small seeds. What do you see there?" "Nothing at all, sir." Truly, from what you cannot see, the whole fig tree grows. That is reality. That is Atman. That art thou. It's the last bit that conveys the most information. We learn that capital R reality, otherwise known as Brahman, is invisible. We also learn that, despite being invisible, it gives structure to the world. The seed does not physically contain a whole fig tree, but we know that given the right conditions, the fig tree will emerge from the seed all the same. At first glance, it seems like the teacher is describing Brahman as the unrealized potential of the world, or something like that. But it doesn't quite stick because this universal force that he is describing is then said to be identical with our individual soul, or our true self. Our true self isn't pure potential, or at least that isn't a full picture, so the concept being portrayed must have more layers. Let's add one more thing before we tie this together. For a lot of people, the idea of a soul is going to come across as pretty vague. Let's think of it this way. If you lose your arm somehow, you don't lose a sense of self. So it makes sense that you don't identify with your arm. When we talk about the Atman, or soul, we are talking about the thing in you which is actually aware that I am talking to it. Not your brain, not your ego, but the pure awareness, unfiltered and unadulterated by the senses. This is Atman, your true self. The Vedic teacher is saying that this pure awareness in you is identical with the invisible force within the fig tree that allows it to develop into a fig tree and nothing but a fig tree. Whether you agree or not, the ramifications of this, if true, are profound. I'll be exploring this concept in more depth in future videos. I could go further into the history, but I think that's enough. We could talk about the legendary Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna's profound insight into nothingness as it relates to the topic. We could explore the ideas of the two modern spiritual masters Ramana Maharshi and Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj that deals with the concept of non-duality. There's the Western angle of Plato and Plotinus. The list goes on and on. Maybe in the future I'll do a deeper dive into the historical angle if that's something people are interested in. For now, we'll leave it at that. How can something invisible and undetectable be influencing the outside world? It's a good question. The fact that it is so hard to perceive is what keeps the existence of the absolute from achieving widespread acceptance in the modern world. After all, we are highly skeptical of anything we can't measure. We are so skeptical of what we can't measure that some contemporary scientists argue that consciousness doesn't exist at all since we can't measure it. Of course, this is absurd since we know that we are conscious. We couldn't hold the belief that consciousness didn't exist if consciousness didn't exist. Try formulating a belief when you're in the middle of a deep dreamless sleep, and you'll understand why this is a ridiculous position to hold. The absolute is similarly unquantifiable, but has the additional hurdle of only being subjectively detectable to a few determined individuals. It is possible to perceive the absolute, but it is incredibly subtle and therefore incredibly difficult for the untrained mind. Although it has other benefits, one purpose of meditation is to fine-tune your senses, specifically your mental sense. We don't usually include the mind as a sixth sense in the West, but it is in the East. When we meditate, we are exercising this mental sense like a muscle. It becomes stronger and more capable of picking up more and more subtle phenomena. Once you have a strong mind, usually acquired after 3 or so years of diligent practice, you have the technical ability to perceive the absolute. Of course, you also need some theoretical knowledge around what it is you're perceiving, since it's initially unfamiliar territory. The great Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche described this need for theory and practice this way. If you just have theory, but don't practice through meditation, it's like climbing a crumbly mountain with only one leg. If you meditate regularly, but have no theoretical understanding of the mental landscape, it's like wandering in a vast desert with no map. In either situation, it's much more difficult to reach your goal. Using theory and practice together is better. Science is built on the ability to replicate studies and findings independent of the observer. It must be as objective as possible. The absolute is as irredeemably subjective as consciousness itself, and even worse, not everyone can perceive it, so science is forced to ignore it. Even if someone tries to explain the absolute to you intellectually, as I'm doing now, there's simply no way for you to truly understand what is being described until you experience it for yourself. Language is referential. If I say cat, you have some memory or experience or something internal which clicks with the 3-letter word cat, and you know what I'm talking about. If I'm using language to refer to something that you don't have a reference for, it's nearly impossible to get a clear picture. It's like the classic dilemma of someone trying to explain the taste of water to someone who has never even seen water. You can try, you may even get close, but until they drink a glass of water themselves, it's just not going to convey the real thing. We're going to try anyway. The absolute is described as being unchanging, timeless, and unmovable. We cannot touch it, we cannot act on it in any way, because it does not exist in the same way that you and I exist. It is infinite and eternal. It exists outside of time and space, yet seems to sit just beside it. A useful metaphor is the projector screen. The projector casts a moving image onto a blank wall. The wall is not affected by the image in any way. Relative reality is the moving picture, and absolute reality is the wall. Without the wall, we cannot see the projection. Let's bring it out of metaphor. We experience absolute reality constantly. We just don't realize it. We experience it as the present moment. The moment of now is eternal, infinite, unchanging. Layered on top of this present moment, this palace of being, is the moving image of ordinary life. If we were to tie the whole thing together, we could say that what we truly are is pure awareness existing as an infinite and unchanging present moment, watching an engaging mirage of colors and sounds run like a river over our eyes. Some spiritual practices argue that the mirage is an illusion, ultimately meaningless. This seems awfully nihilistic to me, and I don't find it compelling. While the absolute is deeper and more profound, it does not negate the relative. The two are dependent on each other. Without the relative, there would be no environment in which the pure awareness existing within the absolute could grow or develop. In a place where nothing changes or happens, there is nothing for consciousness to engage with. It simply floats in a state of pure bliss. By engaging in the relative world that we all exist in, consciousness is able to engage with change in a way that allows it to understand itself better. That's my theory. That we are the eternal awareness at the source of all creation and the individual meatbag watching a YouTube video simultaneously. And in so doing, the ultimate source of reality comes one step closer to achieving its goal of self-knowledge. Do me a favor and give the video a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. Although this video is a good starting point, I'm under no illusion that it's a perfect explanation. If you're confused about anything or felt I brushed over a section too quickly, let me know in the comments below. I'll either respond down there, or if it's a big enough topic, I may make a separate video for it. See you in the next one.